The small, cozy dorm room at Valley University was dimly lit by a single desk lamp. Amaka sat cross-legged on her bed, her notebook in hand, jotting down notes for an upcoming assignment. She glanced at the clock, 9:45 p.m. She knew what was coming. Right on cue, the door flung open, and in bounced Fumi, a whirlwind of energy, her curls bouncing wildly as if in sync with her excitement. "Amaka, you won't believe tonight," Fumi exclaimed, flopping onto her bed dramatically. Her red dress shimmered under the faint light, and the faint scent of her floral perfume mingled with the cool evening air. Amaka sighed, a small smile tugging at her lips. "Do I even have a choice? Go on, tell me." Fumi propped herself up on her elbows, her eyes sparkling. "Okay, so you remember that guy I told you about? Tund? The one with the dimple and that irresistible accent." Amaka nodded, her pen poised above the paper. "The one you met at the cafe last week?" "Yes, that's the one. So tonight, we went to that new rooftop bar, Sunset Lounge. You should have seen the view, Amaka. The city lights were like diamonds scattered across a black canvas. But forget the view. Tund was the real star. He picked me up in this sleek black car, and girl, the man smells like heaven." Amaka raised an eyebrow. "Smells like heaven? Is that even a thing?" "Oh, it's a thing," Fumi replied, waving her hand dismissively. "Anyway, he opened the car door for me like a true gentleman, and the conversation was chef's kiss. He's smart, witty, and, oh my God, his laugh. It's one of those deep, hearty laughs that make you want to laugh along, even if the joke isn't funny." Amaka chuckled. "Sounds like you had a good time. What did you guys talk about?" "Everything." Fumi sat up now, her hands animated as she spoke. "He told me about his travels. He's been to Paris, Dubai, even Tokyo. Can you imagine? He said he's planning to visit Zanzibar next, and I was like, take me with you." Amaka smirked. "Did you actually say that?" "Well, no," Fumi admitted, grinning sheepishly. "But I thought about it. Anyway, we laughed, we danced. Oh, Amaka, the music was amazing." And then, she paused dramatically, her eyes wide. Amaka leaned forward, intrigued despite herself. "And then, he held my hand," Fumi whispered, as if it were a secret meant for only them to hear. Not in a creepy way, but like he genuinely cared. "And when he looked at me, it was like the whole world disappeared. Just me and him under the stars." Amaka's smile softened. "That sounds nice." "It was more than nice, Amaka. It was magical." Fumi flopped back onto her bed, staring at the ceiling with a dreamy expression. Amaka shook her head, amused. "You and your magical nights. I just hope this one isn't like the last guy who swept you off your feet." "Ugh, don't remind me about Chuka," Fumi groaned, covering her face with a pillow. "This is different, though. I can feel it." "If you say so." Amaka turned back to her notebook, though she couldn't help but feel a twinge of curiosity about Tund. The night settled in, and as Fumi's lively recounting faded into the soft hum of night sounds, Amaka wondered what tomorrow would bring. Another tale of romance, or perhaps something more. Amaka had always been the type of girl who preferred the quiet comfort of her books to the noise of fleeting romance. Her world revolved around her goals, graduating at the top of her class and building a stable, successful future. To her, relationships seemed like a distraction, especially when she'd seen so many of her peers fumble through breakups and betrayals. But that didn't mean she was immune to the occasional stirrings of attraction. Amaka was a striking young woman, her beauty understated but undeniable. With her rich, ebony skin and kind, expressive eyes, she had a presence that often drew others in. However, her reserved demeanor kept most admirers at bay. Her love life was more of a series of near misses than romantic adventures. She had met a few guys over the years, men who had, for a moment, seemed like they could be something more. There was Kunnel, the soft-spoken engineering student she'd met during a group project in her second year. He'd been attentive and polite, always offering to carry her books or walk her back to the hostel after late-night study sessions. Amaka had appreciated his thoughtfulness, but quickly realized they had little in common beyond academics. While Kunal seemed content with a simple, predictable life, Amaka had dreams that stretched far beyond the confines of the university. Then there was Sei, a charming law student who'd caught her attention during a debate competition. He was quick-witted and confident, with a way of making everyone around him feel special. Sei had pursued Amaka relentlessly, showering her with compliments and small tokens of affection. For a brief moment, she had entertained the idea of letting him into her world. But their conversations always seemed to veer into superficial territory, and Amaka craved depth, a connection that went beyond flattery and grand gestures. The most recent encounter was with Amaka, a family friend her mother had tried to set her up with during the holidays. He was a successful banker in Lagos, and her mother had been convinced he was husband material. Amaka had agreed to meet him out of respect, but their dinner date had been painfully awkward. Amaka had spent most of the evening talking about his achievements and subtly criticizing her choice to prioritize education over finding a husband. By the end of the night, Amaka knew there wouldn't be a second date. These experiences had left her feeling disillusioned but not bitter. If anything, they reaffirmed her belief that the right person would come along when the time was right. For now, she was content to focus on her studies and her dreams. Still, there were nights when she'd sit alone in her dorm room, listening to Fumi's tales of romance and adventure, and wonder if she was missing out. She'd imagine what it would feel like to have someone who truly understood her, someone who could match her intellect and share her ambitions. But until that person arrived, if they ever did, Amaka was determined to stay true to herself. She had a path to follow, and she wouldn't let anyone derail her journey. Life had taken Fumi and Amaka on vastly different journeys after university. While Fumi had dived headfirst into married life, Amaka had thrown herself into her career with equal zeal. Fumi's life with Uche had blossomed quickly. Their wedding was a grand affair, the kind that lingered in conversations for months. Uche, a young and ambitious business executive, doted on Fumi, and their love seemed to grow stronger with time. 2 years into their marriage, they welcomed a baby girl, Adora, who became the light of their lives. Fumi, ever the social butterfly, seamlessly transitioned into the role of a young mother, juggling playdates, parties, and family responsibilities with her characteristic flair. Amaka, on the other hand, had taken the corporate world by storm. She had joined a prominent advertising firm in Lagos right after her youth service and quickly climbed the ranks with her creativity and tenacity. By the time she was 28, she had become one of the youngest executives in the company, her name synonymous with success and innovation. Yet, despite her professional achievements, her personal life remained relatively quiet. She had dated a few men over the years, but none had stirred her heart enough to consider settling down. Though their paths had diverged, both women often thought of each other. Amaka missed Fumi's infectious laughter and dramatic storytelling, while Fumi longed for Amaka's steady presence and thoughtful advice. But life, as it often does, kept them busy and apart, until fate intervened. One sunny Saturday morning, Amaka was out jogging around her estate, Olive Gardens, a serene and upscale neighborhood in Lagos. She loved the tranquility of the estate, the neatly trimmed hedges, and the soft hum of life around her. As she rounded a corner, she noticed a familiar figure struggling to lift a stroller out of an SUV. "Fumi," Amaka called out hesitantly, unsure if her eyes were playing tricks on her. The woman turned, and for a moment, her face lit up with sheer disbelief. "Amaka, is that you?" They closed the distance between them in seconds, embracing tightly as laughter and tears mingled. "I can't believe this," Fumi said, stepping back to look at her friend. "You look amazing. What are you doing here?" "I live here," Amaka replied, her voice tinged with surprise. "What about you?" "We just moved in last week," Fumi explained, glancing at the house behind her. "Uche, and I thought it would be a great place to raise Adora." She gestured to the toddler, who was now curiously peeking out of the stroller. "And this must be your little one," Amaka said, crouching to greet the child. "She's beautiful, Fumi." "Thank you," Fumi beamed. But look at you, Miss Executive. I heard about your success from some mutual friends. I'm so proud of you. Amaka smiled, though a part of her felt a familiar pang, the one that came when she thought about the parts of her life that still felt incomplete. And you? Married a mom. You've been living your dream, haven't you? It's been wonderful, Fumi admitted, her tone softening. But it's not without its challenges. You'll come over for dinner, won't you? We have so much to catch up on. Of course, Amaka replied warmly. As they chatted, the years melted away, and for a brief moment, it felt as though they were back in their dorm room, sharing dreams and stories. What neither of them realized, though, was that their reunion would mark the beginning of a new chapter in both their lives, one filled with unexpected twists, rekindled bonds, and perhaps even the answers to the questions that lingered in their hearts. Fumi hadn't changed a bit. Despite the years that had passed, she was still the same animated storyteller Amaka had always known, full of life, energy, and just the right amount of drama. Over the next few weeks, they fell back into their old rhythm, meeting up for coffee or chatting on the phone late into the night. And as always, Fumi had plenty to say. I'm telling you, Amaka, Uche is the perfect man, Fumi gushed one afternoon as they sat in her sunlit living room. Adora played with her toys nearby, her giggles adding to the warmth of the moment. He's attentive, charming, and, oh, the way he looks at me, like I'm the only woman in the world. Amaka smiled, sipping her tea as she listened. He sounds wonderful, Fumi. You're lucky to have found someone like that. Lucky. Fumi laughed, tossing her curls over her shoulder. Girl, it's more than luck. It's destiny. And you have to meet him. I'm hosting a dinner next Saturday. Just a small thing, me, Uche, Adora, and you. You'll finally get to see what I've been talking about. Amaka hesitated for a moment. Fumi's vivid descriptions of her husband had painted an almost mythical image of him, tall, dark, handsome, with a voice that could make poetry out of the dullest words. There was a part of her that was curious, intrigued even, to see if Uche lived up to the hype. All right, she said at last. I'll come. Fumi clapped her hands together, her excitement palpable. Perfect. You won't regret it, I promise. Uche is going to blow your mind. The following Saturday, Amaka found herself standing in front of the Uche's house, a bottle of wine in hand. The house was as warm and inviting as Fumi herself, with soft lights spilling out of the windows and the faint sound of music playing inside. She took a deep breath, smoothed her dress, and knocked. The door swung open almost immediately, and there stood Fumi, looking radiant in a flowing Ankara gown. Amaka, she exclaimed, pulling her friend into a tight hug. Come in. You look stunning. Amaka stepped inside, taking in the cozy yet elegant decor. The aroma of roasted chicken and spices filled the air, mingling with the laughter of Adora, who came running to greet her. Welcome to our humble abode, Fumi said, leading her into the dining room. Uche, come and meet my best friend. From the kitchen, a deep, resonant voice called out, Coming, my love. Moments later, Uche appeared, wiping his hands on a kitchen towel. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with a confident yet unassuming air. His smile was warm, his handshake firm, and his eyes carried a quiet intelligence that made Amaka instantly understand what had drawn Fumi to him. Amaka, he said, his voice as smooth as Fumi had described. I've heard so much about you. It's a pleasure to finally meet you. The pleasure is mine, Amaka replied, smiling. Dinner was a lively affair. Fumi, true to form, dominated the conversation with stories of their university days, while Uche chimed in with his own witty remarks. Amaka found herself relaxing, laughing more than she had in months. She couldn't deny it. Uche and Fumi seemed genuinely happy together, their chemistry undeniable. But as the evening wore on and the conversation grew deeper, Amaka couldn't shake the feeling that there was more beneath the surface. Fumi's vibrant stories, while entertaining, occasionally felt rehearsed, as though she were trying to convince herself as much as her audience. And Uche, though charming, carried a certain reserve that Amaka couldn't quite place. As she left that night, Fumi's parting words echoed in her mind. See? I told you he's perfect. Amaka smiled and nodded, but the questions lingered. Was their life as idyllic as Fumi claimed, or was there something beneath the surface that only time would reveal? It was an ordinary Saturday afternoon, and Amaka had stepped into the supermarket to pick up a few essentials. The soft hum of fluorescent lights and the faint chatter of shoppers provided a comforting background noise as she strolled through the aisles. Her mind was preoccupied with work deadlines and the weekend plans she had yet to finalize. Turning a corner, her cart bumped into someone else's. "Oh, I'm so sorry," Amaka began, but her words trailed off as her eyes locked with the man before her. "Amaka?" Uche's deep, familiar voice broke through her surprise. She blinked, her heart skipping a beat. "Uche, I didn't expect to see you here." He smiled warmly, his presence commanding yet unassuming. "Small world, isn't it? Fumi sent me on an errand for some baby supplies." He held up a basket filled with diapers and formula. Amaka chuckled, trying to shake off the sudden flutter in her chest. "The joys of parenthood, I see." As they exchanged pleasantries, Amaka couldn't help but notice the way his eyes held hers, a steady, thoughtful gaze that seemed to see more than what lay on the surface. His voice, rich and smooth, felt like a warm embrace, and his laughter was unforced, resonating in a way that sent an unfamiliar thrill through her. For a moment, the world around them seemed to fade. She found herself drawn to the way he leaned slightly toward her as they spoke, the way his lips curved into an easy smile. It wasn't just his physical appearance, though he was undeniably handsome. It was his quiet confidence, his effortless charm, and the way he seemed to exude a sense of steadiness and strength. Amaka felt a strange heat rising within her, a pull she couldn't explain. She had known Uche as Fumi's husband, as part of the life her friend had built. Yet, in this unexpected moment, something shifted. There was an unspoken energy between them, a connection that made her pulse quicken and her breath hitch. As he reached up to grab a box of cereal from a high shelf, his arm brushed hers, and the brief contact sent a jolt through her. She quickly stepped back, pretending to adjust her bag, but her mind was racing. "What is happening to me?" she thought, her cheeks growing warm. "Are you all right?" Uche asked, his brow furrowing slightly. Yes, she replied quickly, forcing a smile. "Just distracted. You know how work can be." He nodded, his expression thoughtful. "Don't let it consume you, Amaka. Life is too short to miss out on the little joys." His words lingered as they said their goodbyes, and Amaka watched him walk away, his broad shoulders disappearing down the aisle. Her heart felt heavy with a confusing mix of emotions, guilt, curiosity, and a yearning she couldn't quite place. As she left the supermarket, her mind was in turmoil. She had never looked at a man and felt this way, let alone her best friend's husband. The intensity of it frightened her, yet she couldn't deny the spark that had been ignited. Amaka knew she needed to push these feelings aside, bury them deep where they couldn't hurt anyone. But as much as she tried, the memory of Uche's gaze and the warmth of his presence lingered, leaving her questioning everything she thought she knew about herself. Days turned into weeks, but Amaka couldn't shake the memory of her chance encounter with Uche at the supermarket. It was as if that fleeting moment had planted a seed in her mind, one that grew a little more each time she thought about him. And she thought about him often, too often. Every time Fumi called or invited her over, Amaka felt a mixture of anticipation and dread. Fumi's life was a colorful tapestry of vivid stories, and as always, she spared no details when it came to her relationship with Uche. "Amaka, last night," Fumi began one evening during a phone call, her voice tinged with laughter and mischief. "Uche is just amazing. I don't know how I got so lucky. He knows exactly how to make me feel like the most beautiful woman alive. And don't get me started on how attentive he is in bed. Girl, it's like he can read my mind." Amaka forced a laugh, gripping her phone tightly. "That's wonderful, Fumi. I'm happy for you." But as Fumi went on, her words stirred something deep within Amaka, a longing she couldn't ignore. The image of Uche, strong and confident, filled her mind. She could almost hear his voice, feel the warmth of his gaze, and imagine what it might be like to be the one he cherished so deeply. "Stop it, Amaka," she scolded herself, pacing her living room after hanging up. "He's Fumi's husband. Your friend's husband." Yet, no matter how much she tried to rationalize, the feelings wouldn't go away. In fact, they seemed to grow stronger with each passing day, fed by Fumi's endless praise of Uche. It wasn't just his physical presence that lingered in her mind. It was everything Fumi described: the way he loved, the way he cared, the way he made her feel. Amaka found herself comparing every man she met to Uche, and none of them measured up. They were either too brash, too dull, or simply not enough. Uche, on the other hand, seemed to embody everything she had ever wanted in a partner. Her work, once her refuge, became increasingly difficult to focus on. Meetings blurred together, deadlines felt meaningless, and her once steady confidence wavered. She found herself replaying moments from her time with Fumi and Uche: the dinners, the conversations, the way Uche's laugh seemed to fill the room. One evening, after yet another dinner at the Uches, Amaka sat alone in her apartment, staring out at the city lights. The evening had been pleasant as always, but her feelings had only intensified. Watching Uche interact with Fumi and Adora, his tenderness and devotion, had both warmed her heart and broken it. "How can I feel this way about him?" she whispered to herself, tears stinging her eyes. Amaka knew she was treading dangerous ground. These feelings weren't just inappropriate, they were a betrayal of her friendship with Fumi. Yet, the more she tried to push them away, the more they consumed her. She needed a way out, a way to regain control of her emotions before they led her down a path she couldn't come back from. But how do you silence a heart that's already started to speak? Amaka stepped out of the cab and into the grand lobby of the Hilton Hotel in Abuja. The polished marble floors gleamed under the soft glow of chandeliers, and the air smelled faintly of fresh lilies and expensive cologne. She was here for a 3-day advertising conference, a chance to showcase her firm's latest projects and network with industry leaders. As she checked in at the reception desk, her mind was focused on her itinerary: keynote speeches, panel discussions, and late-night brainstorming sessions. She was determined to drown herself in work, using it as a shield against the thoughts that had been plaguing her for weeks. But as she turned toward the elevators, her heart nearly stopped. Standing just a few feet away, casually scrolling through his phone, was Uche. "Uche," she called out, her voice betraying her surprise. He looked up, equally taken aback, but then his face broke into a warm smile. "Amaka, what are the odds?" "What are you doing here?" she asked, forcing herself to sound casual even as her pulse raced. "I'm attending a financial seminar." "Looks like our conferences overlap," he said, slipping his phone into his pocket. "Are you staying here too?" "Yes," she replied, clutching her handbag tightly. "Well, that's a pleasant surprise," Uche said. "It'll be nice to have a familiar face around." As they chatted, Amaka couldn't help but notice how effortlessly charismatic he was. He seemed genuinely happy to see her, his demeanor warm and open. But beneath her polite responses, a storm was brewing. How was she going to survive 3 days in the same hotel as Uche, with their paths inevitably crossing again and again? The first evening of the conference passed without incident. Amaka kept herself busy, throwing herself into conversations with colleagues and avoiding the hotel lobby. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. The next morning, as she walked into the hotel restaurant for breakfast, there he was again. Uche was seated at a corner table, sipping coffee and reading the morning paper. He looked up as she entered, his smile widening. "Amaka," he called out, waving her over. She hesitated for a moment before walking over. "Good morning, Uche." "Join me," he said, pulling out the chair opposite him. She sat down, trying to steady her nerves. "I hope your seminar is going well." "It is, but these things can get a bit dry," he said with a chuckle. "What about you?" "Blazing trails in the advertising world, as always." They fell into easy conversation, and for a while, Amaka almost forgot the turmoil inside her. But then there were the little things, the way his eyes lingered just a moment longer than necessary, the way his voice softened when he spoke to her, and the way her heart betrayed her every time he laughed or smiled. After breakfast, they parted ways, but the encounter stayed with her throughout the day. By evening, she was exhausted, not just from the conference, but from the emotional battle she was waging within herself. That night, as she lay in her hotel room, her phone buzzed. It was a message from Uche. "It was really nice seeing you again. If you're free tomorrow evening, maybe we could grab dinner? It's been a while since we've had a proper catch-up." Amaka stared at the message, her heart pounding. She knew this was dangerous territory, but part of her yearned to say yes, to spend more time with the man who had unknowingly captured her thoughts. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. She could decline, keep things professional, and protect herself and Fumi from whatever this was becoming. Or she could accept, knowing full well the risks of what might unfold. After a long pause, she typed out a response. Amaka sat at the restaurant table, her nerves fraying with every passing second. She had convinced herself that this dinner would be harmless, a casual meal between two people who happened to be in the same city. But deep down, she knew the truth. Her heart was racing not from the excitement of a friendly reunion but from the anticipation of being near Uche. When he arrived, dressed in a crisp white shirt and dark trousers, her breath hitched. He looked effortlessly confident, his smile as warm as ever. "Amaka," he said, his voice low and inviting. "I'm glad you came." Dinner started innocently enough. They talked about work, mutual acquaintances, and the challenges of balancing ambition with life's other demands. But as the evening wore on, the atmosphere shifted. "You know, Fumi always speaks so highly of you," Uche said, his gaze lingering on her. "She says you're the strongest and most driven person she knows. And I can see why." Amaka looked away, her cheeks flushing. "Fumi is too kind. I've just been focused on my career. That's all." "It's more than that," Uche said, leaning forward. "There's a fire in you, Amaka. It's inspiring." The way he said it, the intensity in his voice, sent a shiver down her spine. She met his eyes, and for a moment, the world around them seemed to fade. There was something in his gaze she hadn't seen before, something raw and unguarded. As the dinner ended, neither of them made a move to leave. The conversation grew quieter, more personal, as they shared their fears, dreams, and vulnerabilities. When they finally stood to leave, the tension between them was palpable. "Let me walk you to your room," Uche offered. Amaka hesitated but nodded. "All right." The elevator ride was silent, but the charged energy between them was undeniable. When they reached her door, she turned to him, her heart pounding. "Thank you for tonight, Uche. It was nice." "It was," he said, his voice softer now. "It's been a long time since I've felt this, comfortable with someone." She looked up at him, her resolve wavering. "Uche, this is—" Before she could finish, he reached out, gently tucking a stray strand of hair behind her ear. The touch was electric, and she felt her breath catch. "Amaka," he whispered, his voice heavy with emotion. "I don't know what's happening between us, but I can't stop thinking about you." Her mind screamed at her to stop, to push him away, to remind him, and herself, of the boundaries they were about to cross. But her heart, reckless and yearning, betrayed her. Without thinking, she leaned closer, and their lips met in a kiss that was both tender and desperate. It was as if all the unspoken emotions they had been suppressing came pouring out in that single moment. When they finally pulled apart, the reality of what had just happened crashed down on them. "This is wrong," Amaka said, her voice trembling. "We can't." "Fumi." "I know," Uche interrupted, his expression conflicted. "I know this isn't right, but I can't deny how I feel about you, Amaka." Tears welled up in her eyes as she stepped back, her hand trembling on the doorknob. "This can't happen, Uche. We can't do this to her." He nodded, but the pain in his eyes mirrored her own. "You're right. I need time to figure this out." Amaka slipped into her room, closing the door behind her as tears streamed down her face. She knew they had crossed a line, and there was no going back. Whatever happened next, their lives and their friendship with Fumi would never be the same. Back in Lagos, the familiar hum of the city was no comfort to Amaka. Her apartment, usually her sanctuary, now felt suffocating. The silence only amplified the chaos within her. She paced the living room, replaying every moment with Uche and Abuja, the warmth of his smile, the intensity of his gaze, the way his presence made her feel seen in a way no one ever had before. Uche was everything she had ever wanted in a man. He was kind, intelligent, and attentive, a rare combination of strength and tenderness. With him, she felt a connection she couldn't explain, a magnetic pull that defied logic. It wasn't just his charm or the way he carried himself, it was how he listened, how he truly understood her in a way no one else had. But that was the problem. Uche wasn't hers to dream about. He was Fumi's husband, her best friend's husband. And as much as Amaka's heart longed for him, the guilt of betraying Fumi gnawed at her soul. For days, she wrestled with her emotions, alternating between longing and self-reproach. She would sit by the window, staring out at the bustling streets, wondering how she had allowed herself to get to this point. This has to end, she thought one evening, gripping her teacup so tightly her knuckles turned white. I can't let these feelings destroy everything. Fumi doesn't deserve this. Neither does Uche. But the ache in her heart refused to go away. It was like a wound that wouldn't heal, no matter how much she tried to ignore it. She knew she couldn't move forward without confronting her emotions head-on. She needed to see Uche one last time, not to fan the flames of their connection, but to extinguish them for good. She sent him a message the next morning, her fingers trembling as she typed. Uche, can we meet? Just once. There's something I need to say. He responded almost immediately. Amaka, I feel the same way. Let's talk. They agreed to meet at a quiet cafe in Victoria Island, a neutral space far from the entanglements of their personal lives. When Amaka arrived, her heart was pounding. Uche was already there, seated in a corner booth, his expression unreadable. As she approached, he stood up, offering a faint smile. Amaka. Uche, she said, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside her. They sat down, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. The tension was thick, the air heavy with unspoken words. Finally, Amaka broke the silence. This has to stop, she said, her voice firm but tinged with sadness. Whatever this is between us, it can't go on. Uche looked at her, his eyes searching hers. Amaka, I never meant for this to happen. But I can't deny how I feel about you. And I can't deny how I feel about you either, she admitted, her voice breaking. But that's why we have to end this now. Fumi is my friend. She loves you. She trusts me. And I won't betray her. Uche ran a hand through his hair, his jaw tightening. I never wanted to hurt Fumi. But being around you, it's like I found a piece of myself I didn't know was missing. Amaka's heart ached at his words, but she forced herself to stay resolute. Uche, what we feel doesn't justify what we've done. We crossed a line, and we can't undo that. But we can choose to stop now, before it's too late. Tears welled up in her eyes as she spoke. You have a beautiful family, Uche. A wife who adores you, and a daughter who looks up to you. Don't let this ruin everything you've built with them. He nodded slowly, his shoulders slumping. You're right. This isn't fair to anyone. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of their decisions settling over them. Finally, Amaka reached across the table, placing her hand over his. You'll always mean something to me, Uche. But this is where it ends. He squeezed her hand gently before letting go. Thank you, Amaka, for being stronger than I could be. As they parted ways that evening, Amaka felt a strange sense of relief mingled with heartbreak. She had done the right thing, even if it felt like tearing herself apart in the process. Back in her apartment, she stood by the window, watching the city lights flicker against the night sky. The ache in her heart was still there, but she knew it would fade in time. She had chosen her values, her friendship, and her integrity over fleeting desire. And in that choice, she found a quiet strength that would carry her forward. Advice against infidelity. No matter how strong the temptation, remember the people your actions will hurt. True strength lies in honoring your commitments and respecting the bonds of trust. The momentary thrill of infidelity is never worth the lasting pain it causes. Choose integrity. It will always lead you to peace.